All right, my friends, as I said to you, it is the point in the course where we can begin to see the light at the end of the tunnel. We have, after today, we have 8 normal class periods remaining. We have 1 class period that will be entirely comprised of taking the mini exam on the New Testament. That'll be the last period before Thanksgiving break. And then you can also feel free to leave yourself a note, although I will put this in the Blackboard, that we will not be meeting for class on Tuesday, December 1, which would be the first period after Thanksgiving break. I need to be in Chicago for some meetings. And so I will be doing an introduction via video, to the Anderson book, which we will use for the final portion of this class. Please do know if you haven't purchased that Anderson book yet, you want to get that sometime in November. And in that part of the class, we do things a little bit differently. We'll probably be doing some group work as socially distanced as we possibly can do it, but that will be the final 3 class periods. So things are going to go pretty quickly here. We've got 5 periods on actually books of the Bible, primary content left, and then break, and then the Anderson stuff. There was in Blackboard a quiz that was scheduled to be open starting at noon today, to be taken today and tomorrow. That quiz is not going to happen. I decided to, instead of having 2 quizzes on the Christ section and none on the consummation section, to do 1. You've already taken it on Christ. So you will have 6 quizzes, but there's none for you to think about this week. There is, however, a reflection essay that's due Friday evening, and one of the students after the 7:45 class noted that that is not visible. I tried to make it visible. I'll make sure that it's visible, but just so you know that that is a reflection essay. Basically is simply over your responses to the readings you'll be doing for class on Thursday. On Thursday, we're going to look at the New Testament book of Acts, and it's probably a bit longer reading than usual, not a lot longer, but a bit longer. And the question that will be before you to reflect upon is kind of a buy or sell question. Do you buy or sell the argument that the main character of Acts is the Holy Spirit? And if so, why do you say so? And if not, why would you disagree with that? So that is something you will need to have uploaded to the Blackboard by midnight on Friday evening. But again, no quiz for this week, so you don't have to worry about trying to cram that in between now and tomorrow night. Are there any other questions or clarifications I can provide to you with regard to the direction of the remainder of the class or anything in Blackboard? Okay. Let's move on forward then into our final gospel, the Gospel of John. Quick review, what are the other 3 gospels together called? They are called the what? Synoptic Gospels. Very good. What does synoptic mean? Is that? Seen together. That's right. They've got a pretty similar view of Jesus, a pretty similar kind of flow and a lot of overlap in content. Now, we were very careful to point out the distinctives in them, but they are similar enough to be called synoptics historically. And let's just see if we can do a quick refresher. Who is Jesus like in the Gospel according to Mark? What did we compare Jesus to there? Batman, that's right. He's like Batman because he's kind of mysterious. People don't know what to make of him, but he's a man of action. He's a rescuer. He's a deliverer, right? He's always on the move. Immediately, says Mark. In Matthew, who is Jesus compared to? Moses, right? Because he is the new Moses. He's the lawgiver. He goes down to Egypt. He comes out of Egypt. He's got this prophet, priest, king thing going on. He's Israel's leader. He is the culmination of Jewish expectation. And then in Luke, who is Jesus like? Mother Teresa, right? Because like Mother Teresa crossed over those lines of castes in India, had a heart for the lost, the sick, the broken, moved forward in compassion. So does Jesus in the book of Luke. Jesus is the tender, bedside manner kind of physician who meets people in their moments of greatest need. Now, those three Gospels, again, are enough alike to be called the Synoptics. We're going to go to John now, and we're going to go to a very different place. John is really, really dissimilar to the Synoptics. In fact, I remember as a little kid, I was trying to read through the whole Bible. And it was first grade, and this was a great thing for me to do as a first grader. I'd been given this Bible, and I said I was going to read all the way through it. And I got through Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and I said to my dad, who was a pastor, I said, Dad, I read Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and I just skip John, move on to Acts. And he said, no, John is so different that you'll have a completely unique experience reading through John. And so I did. And I want to share with you some of those distinctives today as we look at the book of John. Who is Jesus comparable to in John? I'm going to, people say they date themselves when they do things like this. I'm not going to date myself. I'm going to show you something that's before my time. But how many of you have watched the movie E.T.? All right? I have two. What do we know about E.T.? What does E.T. stand for? Extraterrestrial, right? He's an alien. He's come from another world. What else do we know about E.T.? Anybody else remember from watching the movie? E.T. has a home, right? He wants to phone home. He comes from another place, and he's going to return there. At the end of the movie, excuse me, I think this is what's depicted in this picture. You know, the mothership has come back to get E.T. And E.T. has he has some healing powers, right? He has healing powers. He's all about love. And the authorities have a problem with E.T. In fact, they have some significant conflict with E.T. Now, those are spoilers, but E.T. is a great movie, and I have to wonder if Steven Spielberg, thinks about things like the story of Jesus as he comes up with these films. Spielberg is Jewish, but he certainly knows enough about Jesus to draw some of those connections. Jesus in John comes from another place, and he's returning to another place. He speaks mysteriously but openly. Conflict follows him around. But he has this healing power and a loving heart. E.T.'s heart glows kind of with love. And he's actually, spoiler alert, E.T. kind of comes back from the dead in this movie. So there's some definite comparisons there. Let's go to John here with some quick facts. John, as was mentioned by our presenters, we're talking about the very end of the first century. 90, 95, all perfectly valid. We're just going to give ourselves a little bit of margin and say a range somewhere between 80 and 110 CE. So we're looking at 50, as many as, perhaps as much as 80 to 90 years after Jesus. In all likelihood, the final of our 4 biblical gospels to be written. The audience and the author deserve to share a line here because of what I want to tell you. We have a church tradition that says that the author of this book was the disciple and then the apostle John, who was brother of James, a fisherman from Galilee, son of Zebedee, one of what Jesus called the sons of thunder. But the actual text itself, as with the other 3 Gospels, doesn't say that. It's anonymous. It does not say written by so-and-so on such and such a date. That's not in there. What we do have in this book is a clear dependence upon and influence by someone known as the disciple Jesus loved. Sometimes just written, the beloved disciple, same thing. The idea being there's one person very close to Jesus. Jesus was very fond of this person, who probably after Jesus was raised, ascended to heaven, goes off and then begins a community of his own disciples and teaches them about Jesus and tells stories and builds followers out of this group. The name of this group is sometimes called the Johannine School or the Johannine community. Johannine is just an adjective that means of John. Like Matthean is of Matthew, Markan is of Mark, Johannine is of John. A community of followers that are called Johannine. Now, is this beloved disciple John, the brother of James? Could be. It's a possibility. Others have said maybe it's even Lazarus, because according to the book of John, Jesus loved Lazarus. Both of those are possible, perhaps not likely, but possible. But there was some individual who was close to Jesus who established a following of Jesus by building his own community. And what he told his community, his school, was written down and then became the Gospel of John in all likelihood. So both the audience and the authors are this community. They hear it, they write it, they tell it to each other. This becomes their gospel. Why do we think this? About why couldn't it just have been John the Scout, right? Well, there's a couple of clues at the very end of the text of the Gospel of John that I would like to point out to you that are indicators. So this is from John chapter 21. It's after the resurrection of Jesus. And Jesus is having a talk with Peter. And it turns out that the disciple Jesus loved, this mystery man, is like trailing him, like a secret agent or private eye or something like that. But here's what it says. Peter turned and saw the disciple whom Jesus loved following them. I don't know why he's following them. I don't know why he's doing this, but he is. He was the one who had reclined next to Jesus at the supper and said, Lord, who is it that's going to betray you? So, clue right there, he's sitting next to Jesus at the Last Supper. He's got to be pretty close to Jesus. When Peter saw the disciple Jesus loved, he said to Jesus, what about him, Lord? And Jesus said to him, if it's my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you? Follow me, Peter. So the rumor spread in the community that the disciple would not die. Jesus didn't say that he wouldn't die, but if it's my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you? This is the disciple who is testifying to these things and has written them. And we know that his testimony is true. But there are many other things that Jesus did. If every one of them were written down, I suppose the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. Now let's look at some of these highlighted texts here, because this is really interesting to me. So the disciple that Jesus loved is following Peter. Why? We don't know. He overhears this conversation. And it says there in that final paragraph that the one who testifies to these things and has written them, we know that his testimony is true. What does the word we mean? It's plural, right? It's more than one. So he's testified, he's written some things down, and now there's a we that comes in. Maybe the group of us, we're doing a final edit on this, we're doing a revision. Interestingly enough, in the next sentence it says I suppose. And so there's an I and there's a we, there's a him and there's an us. It seems like there's a group of people working on this together. But here's the other interesting thing that's in yellow. Jesus is talking to Peter, and in the text that precedes this, it's about Jesus telling Peter that he's going to die for his faith. And Peter says, well, what about this guy who's following us? Will he die for his faith? And Jesus says, well, if he remains till I come back, that's no business of yours. And so the writer says, a rumor broke out that this disciple would not die. Okay, come with me into this Johannine school. wherever it's located, 100 miles away from Jerusalem, 200 miles away, the people in this community have the idea that their leader will not die. That rumor begins to emerge. But by the time this gospel is finished, he probably did die. Because they have to provide this little explanation. There was a rumor that he wouldn't die, but actually, Jesus never said that. So don't worry about it. He did die. So that tells you this is probably coming into final form after the beloved disciple is gone. Bottom line, could it have been one person? Could it have been John? It could have been. In all likelihood, this beloved disciple, whatever his name was, started his own group of followers of Jesus independently. And this is what he testifies to have seen happen in the life of Jesus. And it becomes this gospel. A couple other quick facts here on John. Sorry about the repeat there. 879 verses, so it's longer than Mark, shorter than Matthew and Luke. And it is not a synoptic gospel. We're talking about an entirely different kind of material here. Same genre, but there are sufficient differences to put it in a category of its own. What are some of those differences? Let's check off 4 of them before we go into great detail on the distinctives. Number one, it's clear that John, and we'll just call him John going forward, has different sources. Remember the sources that go into Matthew and Luke? You know, you remember those diagrams we made? We've got the Mark source. We've got the Q source, Saint's Gospel, we'll call it. We've got the M source, stuff that only Matthew has, and L, stuff that only Luke has. And specifically, we talked about Luke and Matthew sitting here at a desk, and they've got documents in front of them, and they're picking and choosing and writing and borrowing. John's got none of that, we don't think. He just has an entirely different body of information about the life of Jesus, the death and resurrection of Jesus. Now, as we said in our discussion of how to get to Omaha, he ends in the same place as the other 3. Jesus coming to Jerusalem on Passover weekend, dying on the cross, being raised from the dead. But between the beginning and there, he does a whole lot of different stuff. So he has his own sources, his own memories. Perhaps he does have a written document, but it's not Mark, Q, L, M. It may be that he has a written document called the Book of Signs or the Signs Gospel. That's an idea. We can't prove it. Bottom line is he has different sources than the Synoptics. Second thing that's different is that he has different content. We'll talk in a little bit about the birth narrative, absence, and what's in place, just a poem. For instance, Jesus doesn't cast out evil spirits in John. No Christmas story. And we'll be more specific on what some of those differences are as we go along in the talk today. Number 3, he has a different structure, a different chronology. Here in John, there are ideas that perhaps Jesus traveled to Jerusalem 3 different times in the course of 3 years. Maybe an extended order of his work, a different sequence, and the structure is different. As was noted in the presentation, we have kind of 2 books within John. The first 12 chapters are sometimes called the Book of Signs, and then chapters 13 through 21 are sometimes called the Book of Glory. So it's a different structure. There's kind of A side and B side on this. And then, fourthly, there's a different aim and a different vision of who Jesus is and what he's up to. Jesus is the one who comes from the Father, like E.T., comes from another world, and he's going to return to him. And that's different for reasons that we're going to lay out here. So that's kind of an overview on some of the differences with the Synoptics that really mark John as in his own kind of box by itself. But let's get into some distinctives here that will flesh out those four overview points. Distinctives in John. I've given you 5 distinctives in each of the other Gospels and each of the Synoptics. I could give you 10, 15 in John, but I'm going to stick with 5. I think that's a little easier to remember. Some distinctives in John. Number 1, Jesus talks about himself a lot in the book of John. You remember Mark? We have the messianic secret. Jesus doesn't want people to know who he really is, what he's really up to. He doesn't want people to even tell others that they've been healed by him. It ain't like that in John. In John, Jesus talks about himself cryptically but openly. Cryptically but openly. And that's why we have this motif or this recurring theme of the I am. So here in John chapter 8, verse 24 and following, Jesus says, I told you that you would die in your sins, for you will die in your sins unless you believe that I am he. People are like, okay, who are you? For Jesus, it's just enough to say, I am he. But he says later on, when you have lifted up the Son of Man, in other words, when you crucify me, when you see what happens, then you will realize that I am he. Now, what does he mean by I am he? Well, it really comes to a head a couple of verses down. So skip down to verse 57. They're talking about Abraham. And Jesus is talking like he knows Abraham. Wow. Okay, the Jews say to him, you are not yet 50 years old, and have you seen Abraham? Like Abraham lived 1,800 years ago, Jesus. What in the world are you talking about? And here's where Jesus drops the truth bomb. Verse 50, and Jesus said to them, very truly I tell you, before Abraham was, I am. Now, there are 2 reasons why that sentence is extremely consequential. The first is that Jesus is saying he precedes Abraham. How can this be, except for Jesus be saying that he's eternal? That's an extraordinary claim, isn't it? For me to say, before George Washington was, I was alive. What? Jesus is saying he actually precedes, he's the forerunner of Abraham, which is huge. But if that's not big enough, here's where things really, really get serious. He says before Abraham was, and then he just says 2 words. I am. Where have we heard those I am words earlier in this class? Exodus chapter 3. What's happening? Perfect. Moses is called by God. He's by the burning bush. Exodus chapter 3. He says, okay, God, I go back to Egypt. Who sent me? Who did I tell him sent me? And God simply says, I am who I am. In Greek, that phrase is translated ego eimi. Ego eimi. And here Jesus drops ego eimi. Jesus says, I am the Old Testament God. I am he. This is the same phrase that is used, isn't that mentioned, when Jesus is arrested and the guys, these soldiers, tough guys, fall over backwards. They're like, what? Look at the response of the Jewish leaders. So they picked up stones to throw at him. You can't say stuff like this and get away with it. This is straight up blasphemy. Jesus does not do this in Matthew. He doesn't do it in Mark. He doesn't do it in John. But here he's openly saying, I'm one with the Father. I came before Abraham came. I'm the God of the Old Testament. And this causes huge conflict. Jesus talks about himself. Number two, I should point this out too, because I have a little graphic. We also have an I am as part of 7 I am statements of Jesus. Probably, if you grew up in the church at some point in your life, you've heard a sermon series on the 7 I ams. I preached one series like that. I think almost everyone has. Jesus says, I am the true vine. If you want to be alive, you can't get cut off from me. You got to stay connected. I am the true bread. If you want to stop being hungry and craving after other things, let me satisfy you. I'm the light of the world. I shine in a dark place. I am the gate. I'm the one. You got to go through me if you want to get to the Father. There's no other way. There's no end run. I'm the good shepherd. I take care of the sheep. I'm the resurrection and the life. And then this one is especially powerful in my personal life. John 14:6. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Which, by the way, church, by the way, students, by the way, Americans, by the way, world today, is a very unpopular thing to say. In a pluralistic world, we like to say, I am a way to God. I am one truth you can believe. I'm one possible way to live your life. But Jesus goes with a definite article, as if to say the word only in each one of those. I'm the only way, the only truth, the only life. That is one bold thing to say. Jesus is very, very open about his identity in connection with God. And just, you don't get anything like this in Mark. Number 2 theme in John is when Jesus talks about obedience, when he's thinking about his connection with the Old Testament law, he stresses love. Love, 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 love. It is clear that in the Johannine community, love is a principal theme. We see this because when we'll talk about this later on too, we have these other books called John. It's confusing if you don't know your Bible very well, because you got John, and then you've got, after that, you've got 1 John. That's a letter written by this community, and then 2 John and 3 John, so you got 4 books called John. But those John letters come from the same Johannine school, and they all talk about love too. Love is a big theme. So look at what Jesus says in John 13. I give you a new commandment that you love one another. What's my commandment? Love one another. Just as I have loved you, so you should love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. So what is the commandment? That you love. Now look at verse 15. Jesus turns the same thing around, and he says, what does love look like? Following my commandments. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love. Just as I keep my Father's commandments and abide in his love. Love equals obedience to God's commandments equal love. Love is a huge theme. I'll give you some numerical totals on that coming up in a little bit. John, the Johannine community, are very lovey-dovey. Number 3, there are miracles. Except I crossed that out. Because in John, there are no miracles as much as there are signs. We need to talk about this a little bit. Signs. In the book of John, when Jesus does things that are miraculous, this is the wrong term, but it might help you, supernatural things, he's not doing it so much for the person who benefits alone, as he's doing it so everyone around will recognize who Jesus is. Okay. Look, for instance, as a comparison at what we have in Matthew chapter 16. Matthew 16 says this, the Pharisees and Sadducees came, and to test Jesus, they asked him to show them a sign from heaven. And Jesus says a couple things about looking at the weather, and then he says this, an evil and adulterous generation asks for a sign. You want a sign? It's an indicator that you're evil. That you are, in some sense, cheating on God. That's what adulterous means. So no sign will be given to it except the sign of Jonah. Sign of Jonah, by the way, is probably a reference to the resurrection. You ain't going to get any sign from me, Jesus says, except my resurrection, and then peace out, he left them and went away. That's how Matthew records it. Now, this is really tiny font, you have to take my word for it. The next screen is a screen cap of the appearance of the word signs in John. Basically, what this screen cap shows you is that Jesus is always doing signs in John. You just look at the last two, if you have great eyesight. But the reference to John 9, John 11, John 9. So the Pharisees said, this man is not from God, for he doesn't observe the Sabbath. But others said, how can a man who is a sinner perform such signs? John 11, so the chief priests and the Pharisees called a meeting of the council and said, what do we do? This man is performing many signs. The fact that this gets the attention of the Pharisees and the Sadducees and chief priests means that these signs for Jesus build momentum, build belief in people. It's not just that Jesus is curing someone of leprosy so that they stop scratching their skin. It's that, but it's also so that everyone will see that Jesus can cure leprosy and believe in him. Signals of who Jesus really is. We have, again, the number 7 is so important to John. 7 signs of Jesus. You don't need to write these all down, but you can probably just remember a few. Water into wine is a sign, makes the lame walk, walking on the water, sights the blind, raised Lazarus from the dead, among others. These signs are meant to be like, hey, look at me, whoa, pay attention. I am from the Father. I can do these things because of my true identity. Again, such a difference. Do you see it, class, from Mark? And Mark is like, shh, don't tell anybody. Don't even tell people that I healed you. Don't tell people who I am. And John is like, let me show you. Come here. Look and listen and see. Just a really, really different picture of Jesus between Mark and John, the synoptics and John. Okay, distinctive number 4, this is going to take some explanation, is that there is conflict or controversy with, and the quotation marks are very much intentional here, with the Jews. Sectarian controversy. Sectarian simply means that there's group-to-group conflict. Now, I'm going to tell you something here that might surprise you. There are some scholars and historians who accuse the book of John of being anti-Semitic. What's anti-Semitic mean? Yeah, against the Jews. Hitler's anti-Semitic, right? Persecution of the Jews. There are some who say that Christians have taken an anti-Semitic perspective toward the Jews on the basis, in part, of John. John chapter 8 is in front of you here. It's a long passage. I'm not going to read all of it, but as my laser pointer here says, Jesus says, why do you not understand what I say? It's because you cannot accept my word. And he's talking to the Jews. You are from your father, the devil, and you choose to do your father's desires. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth because there is no truth in him. We've got to unpack this. What in the world is going on? First of all, let's note something ironic and surprising. Why would John talk about the Jews this way? What's really strange is, as you and I, and surely John knew, Jesus was Jewish. His disciples were Jewish. Most of the first followers of Jesus were Jewish. So how can he pit Jesus against the Jews? Right? So It's the Americans. He's an American. What's going on? Here's what we believe. Remember the day of John? Talking late in the first century? Many people believe that by the end of the first century, there was significant conflict between the Christians and the Jewish leaders. The Christians who were declaring that Jesus was the Messiah were being forbidden to worship in the synagogues. One brother accepts Jesus as Lord. The other brother rejects him as Lord. There were issues breaking forth between the early Christians and the late first century Jews. And it's stung, right? Maybe there's this community of the disciple of Jesus love. Maybe there's this Johannine school because they all got kicked out. I don't know. It's possible. They were no longer accepted, so they started their own community. And so the disciple Jesus loved, the author, the influencer, the leader in this community. So why do we have that? Well, we've always had that. Jesus had that too. The question, if you've got your thinking cap on, is, did that ever really happen? And we don't know for sure. It's clear that Jesus did have some differences of opinion with the Jewish leaders, the Pharisees. I mean, I think that carries through. But did Jesus ever call them children of the devil? Or is this something that John is reporting as a way of saying, look, that's going to happen, that's always happened? That's not a question that you would hear from a pastor in a sermon. It's not something that would come up in a Sunday school class. It's something that at the college level we have to ask. Do some of these stories about Jesus actually serve purposes that are more about what was happening in 90 CE than 30 CE? There's certainly that possibility. And it means we have to be really discerning readers. I mean, I just saw on social media, I don't know, Instagram or what, someone in my feed had posted a picture and it was kind of like, you know, we do not have to have a biblical worldview. What we need to have is Jesus' worldview. And so the thread of discussion was like, well, what is Jesus' worldview other than the biblical worldview? And people say, well, there's points in the Bible where there's disagreement between what Jesus says and Paul says, and I'm always going to go with what Jesus said. You know, if you want to always go with what Jesus said, remember that Jesus said that you guys are, your father is the devil. Be more like Jesus. Tell people you disagree with that their father is the devil. It's never as simple as you think it is. It takes work. You have to be careful with some of these passages because they are explosive. Sectarian controversy, did it ever really happen? Depends on which scholar you look at. Number 5, we're talking here about Christology. We need to introduce this term. Hopefully those of you on this side of the room can see my whiteboard at least a little bit. Christology is a theological term that basically refers to conversations about the true character of Jesus, the nature of Jesus. It's easiest to just show you this picture, for those who can see it. When we talk about high Christology, we're talking about passages and theological concepts that emphasize Jesus' divine nature. You ever hear people say Jesus is fully God and fully man? Okay. It's true, by the way, I agree with that. High Christology emphasizes Jesus' godness, his divinity. Lower Christology emphasizes Jesus' humanity, Jesus the carpenter, Jesus the man from Nazareth, Jesus the son of Mary, the brother, half-brother of James, Jesus the guy who got hungry. Now, as Christians, Orthodox believers believe Jesus is fully God and fully man, but Christology is a way of saying, which of these are we talking about with greater emphasis right now? John has a very high Christology. In that far more than Mark, and quite a bit more than Matthew and Luke, he emphasizes the godness, the divinity of Jesus. Christology is a word you're going to absolutely have to know. Make sure you understand this. Raise your hand if you don't understand it. Because we're going to go into this in the epistles too. Because there's some epistles that have a higher Christology than others. And this is something that you will get a lot more information on in Christian Story too. But a higher Christology is more of an emphasis on Jesus' divinity. So one of the ways that John carries forward this understanding of Jesus' divinity is by using a couple of terms. One of which is the logos, and the other is the I am thing. We talked about the I am thing before. But let's talk about the logos a little bit here. And don't worry about the first one, actually. Just look at the second one. For John, Jesus is the Son of God, the eternal Word made flesh. Eternal Word. Jesus says, before Abraham was, I am. I've been around a long time. Okay? Mark begins his story of Jesus when Jesus begins his public ministry. Matthew and Luke begin the story of Jesus at his birth. John says, I'll take it further than that. I'll go back to the beginning of the world. All the way back to the beginning of creation. Anything you can do, I can do better. And so we have, sorry about that, we have this prologue in the book of John. We don't have a Christmas story. We have instead a poem that places Jesus at the beginning of the universe. In the beginning was the Word. The word's capital W because the Word is referring to Jesus. And the Word was with God, and the Word was, you just can't get any higher Christology than that. Jesus was with God, and Jesus was God at the very beginning. And then he says, all things came into being through him, and without him, not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life, and that life was the light of all people. This is meant, don't miss this is meant to make you think of Genesis 1. What do we have in Genesis 1? We have darkness becomes light because of the Word, let there be light. This is a creation story. And it says that Jesus is the creator. You can't get a higher Christology than this. This is how John begins his gospel. Not with, here's Jesus healing a blind man, or here's Jesus teaching on a hillside, but here's Jesus making the galaxy, along with God. He goes down the second little sections here about John the Baptist, and then after that he says, he came to his own, but his own people did not accept it. Who's his own people? Who's he referring to there? Right, the Jews. But he sets the tone there. Jesus is the I am the Logos. A couple other things just to note here. Jesus gives the Holy Spirit as a comforter and teacher. It says that Jesus can send the Holy Spirit. That's a pretty high Christology. If you can send the Holy Spirit, you got a lot of power. And then Jesus connects with people at their point of deepest need. I am, right? Jesus is the I am to the woman at the well, like God is I am to the Israelites when they're in Egypt. I am who I am. I'm here. I am willing. I am near to you. Very, very high Christology. Just a couple of fun facts here as we wrap up John. 4 L words, just to reiterate, are really big for John. Logos is the the particle that we get in words like biology, logic, it means that the wisdom, the truth, the reality. It's just a really multifaceted Greek word. John gets translated in our English as word, the word, but it's just the logos of God, the mind of God, the truth, the wisdom. It's a powerful word. It comes up 35 times in his book. Light and darkness, a theme that John loves to explore. Light shining in dark places, light overcoming darkness 16 times. Life 42 times. You look in your concordance, you don't find this word in Luke and Matthew and Mark nearly with the frequency you find it in John. And then love, like I said, love is a big theme in John. 39 times. These are some things that make John's gospel unique. So let's go back here for just a minute as we summarize the gospels by taking a look at two graphics that I think are kind of like cheat sheets for you. You may want to just write down a couple of these notes. These are, I'm going to tell you right away, these are oversimplifications, but they're helpful to remember what each of the gospels prioritize. Okay, so graphic number one, what's Jesus up to in each of the four gospels? In Matthew, the emphasis is on what Jesus said. But Jesus the teacher, right? We have the Beatitudes. We have the Sermon on the Mount. We have the woes against the Pharisees. We have the parables about the kingdom of heaven. We have those 5 discourses. Matthew wants you to see what Jesus said. Mark has Jesus the action man, right? Jesus like Batman. He's always on the move. Where's he going? Immediately this, and then immediately that, and then immediately the next thing. Boom, 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 there he goes. Got to keep up with it. Breathlessly chasing this man around Galilee and Judea because Jesus has places to go, things to do, people to help, and ultimately a cross to carry. He's on a sprint to the cross. In Luke, watch Jesus in terms of his interpersonal connectedness, who Jesus included. That's what Luke wants you to see. Foreigners, the unclean, Samaritans, helping Jews on the side of the road. And then in John, it's about Jesus' identity. What does he reveal about himself? I am. Look at this sign, look at this sign, look at this sign, look at this sign. Logos coming from the Father, returning to the Father. How Jesus identified it. Again, it's not that none of the other things appear in the other 3, but these tend to be emphasis points for the 4 biblical gospel writers. Do this again with another slide. What does Jesus reveal about God in each of the 4 gospels? Okay? In Matthew, Jesus reveals God's wise rule. Leadership, kingship, the rules that organize the nation, Beatitudes, Jesus as prophet, priest, king, Jesus as Judaism fulfilled, Jesus as inaugurated God's kingdom of heaven here on earth. In Mark, what do we learn about God? God has urgency in his mind, in his heart. There's a lot to be done. There's a great work before us. God's urgent action is clear. In Luke, I'm sorry the text is a little bit smaller there, God's transforming compassion love and connection with people who others do not love, Gentiles, poor people, tax collectors, those who are isolated because of issues of uncleanness. And then in John, Jesus reveals God's eternal love from the beginning, love before creation. And then this is what God really wants. This is the new commandment, that you love one another. So again, those are probably oversimplifications, but I think it will help you remember some of the distinctives just a little bit better. They tend to be kind of like top priority issues, not exclusive to them, but top priority issues for Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, each of the Gospels. So having been now through these four Gospels, let's ask a couple of wrap-up questions. And let's allow ourselves to sort of mentally depart from Northwestern College, and let's think for a couple of minutes about how a non-Christian, a non-believer, perhaps a secular academic would think about Jesus. If there are these differences in the portrayal of Jesus, is he secretive or open? Being one example. If there are these differences, does it ever make you wonder, even just for a little bit, which of these Gospels is telling us the truth about Jesus? Does it ever make you wonder, just for a little bit, if they're conflicting with one another and one might be more correct than another? I want you to be able to understand from a scholarly perspective that beyond the walls of a Christian institution, and sometimes even within them, there are people who wonder if some of the stories about Jesus might be a little bit embellished. Like the story of Jesus calling the Jews children of the devil. Is that maybe a fabrication for another reason? All of these issues come together in a question that scholarship wonders about, which is the historical Jesus versus the Christ of faith. Make sure you understand the difference between these two terms, because there are people who want to say these are entirely different people. The historical Jesus is the man who actually lived 2,000 years ago. The carpenter from Galilee, born in Nazareth. What was he really like? If we had been there at the time, we could have a video camera on him. What did he really do? What did he really say? Where did he really go? With whom did he really connect? And there are some who would say that's different from the Christ of faith. The Christ of faith is the higher Christology version of Jesus that we get in the Gospels. Maybe some exaggeration has been done. Maybe some stories have just been invented. Maybe if we had been there at the time, we would have seen someone very different from the person that is portrayed in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. At different times in the last century or so, it has become very popular among scholars to say we need to find the historical Jesus. These have sometimes been called the quests for the historical Jesus. What I think is important to note is that, and here's the big question, if the Gospels are theological documents rather than historical documents, who is Jesus really? That's what the historical Jesus asks. And so what comes up is the problem, as I call it, of circularity. Okay? again, if you can see this whiteboard, great. Here's what you were probably raised to believe as a Christian, I know I was raised to believe, is that Jesus was born, lived, ministered, betrayed, died, raised, ascended. After that, the church grew up as the followers of Jesus after he'd gone back to heaven. So that the Jesus that we read about in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John did all those things, and in response to all the miracles and teachings, all the wonderful things, boom, here came the church. The question of people in the Jesus, historical Jesus quest, basically says, what if you had a church and people in the church wrote the Gospels and they actually created this? That Jesus maybe didn't do very much of those things at all. But that later on, over decades, people, their imaginations ran wild, and they started writing stories down, and boom, they got into the Bible. So that this Jesus didn't produce this. The church actually invented most of the stories about Jesus. This is the way that many people, and you read a little bit about this in your resurrection article today, many secular scholars and even some Christian scholars, what's going on? Did this make this? The question I have, and I want you to think about, is how would that happen? Where does the church come from if there wasn't that Jesus? If Jesus was just a carpenter who got himself into trouble and got nailed to a cross, he's like a whole lot of other people living in that time who got themselves in trouble and got nailed to crosses. And the churches didn't pop up after each one of them. Something had to have happened here to produce this, don't you think? Otherwise, why would this produce this? Why would people die as martyrs for made-up stories? These are some of the things that are discussed in that resurrection article. But make no mistake about it, there are plenty of people who, out there at Harvard and Yale and USC, and they say most of this is the invention of this. So, how would they know that? Well, this is not particularly significant to the course material, but I would note that they'd say, okay, well, let's see what we can learn about Jesus in places other than the Bible. What do we really know? What are our sources for Jesus? You know the ones we have in the Bible. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, there's some stuff in Paul. And we actually know that there are some sources behind those sources too, right? Where does Matthew come from? Well, it comes from Mark and Q, so let's list Q, let's list L, let's list M. We got those, but they say, can we really trust those? Maybe we should measure them against other reports of Jesus. And we actually do have some. So Tacitus and Suetonius, both writing about 90 years after Jesus, or about 10 years after John, talk about Jesus. These are people who aren't writing Gospels, they're not believers, but they know about him. So there are some people historically that are trustworthy from the perspective of a secular historian. Tacitus says that there are issues within Rome, and Nero blames the Christians for them. And that we know that they come from, they're followers of Jesus, who was executed during the reign of Tiberius at the hand of one of the prosecutors, Pontius Pilate. So secular history, non-biblical history, confirms that Jesus was executed by Pilate. Suetonius is talking about the Emperor Claudius, which is middle of the first century, says that there were fights among Christians. And so the Roman emperor got so sick of it, he kicked the Christians out. Well, clearly, though, there were Christians. We know some things about Christians from history. We also have some writings of Josephus. We talked about Josephus early on, but these are very, very much debated whether they were actually Josephus or people stuck stuff into Josephus later on. The bottom line is that, in addition, we also have some of these other Gospels, Gospel of Thomas, Gnostic Gospels. There's other stuff out there. The bottom line is that study of Jesus is fascinating to people who would not accept him as Christ. And it's just important as you come to college that you recognize that different conclusions about Jesus are being drawn at different colleges by different professors and different students. These books get written and published from time to time, and they make a lot of headlines. Marcus Borg says, you look at Jesus, and ultimately what you got is just another Jewish rabbi. Nothing special. Maybe he was a little bit different, maybe a little bit smarter. But there's some people who say, Jesus probably was just another rabbi. John Dominic Crossan, who was referenced in that resurrection article we read, said Jesus was a cynic sage. So he just kind of wandered the countryside and made comments about things. And people thought he was interesting enough to follow. Did he do miracles? Nah. Was he raised from the dead? No. Crossan, in fact, as you read, says that Jesus' body was probably thrown into a pit or eaten by dogs. But this is the conclusion he comes to. Or he says Jesus was a peasant revolutionary who probably said some things against Caesar or against the powers of Jerusalem. And people are like, yeah, I agree with that. Follow this guy. But was he the eternal Son of God from the creation of the world? No. That stuff is made up by the church. I want you to come away with this wondering about this chicken and egg thing. Jesus and the church. Wrestle with that. What makes more sense to you? What came first? Two more slides. Among this group of people who are searching for the historical Jesus is a gathering called the Jesus Seminar. And the Jesus Seminar comes together and looks at the Gospels, and then they go line by line through the Gospels, and they vote on how likely it is that Jesus said what the Bible says Jesus said. You have here a passage from Matthew here that shows the Lord's Prayer. And do you see the different colors? It's kind of probably hard to see from where you're sitting, but different colors. Some parts of it are red, some are black, some are pink. This is a Jesus Seminar Bible. This means that these historians looking at Jesus think that Jesus said very little of the things he's credited for. They vote, and they vote with beads. It's a crazy little thing. The things that they vote, a red bead, are things they think Jesus did say. Pink are probably said. Gray are probably didn't say. And black are things the church just made up, and they're sure of it. Look at this Bible. Look at how much of it's black. The sense of so many people in this Jesus Seminar is, Jesus didn't do these things. These are all made up by the church. Ask yourself the question. Have the guts to press back. Why would the church make these things up? But know that out there in the world, there's a lot of people who are fascinated by Jesus who just come to very different conclusions than you do and I do. Or at least I do. I can't speak for you. Wrapping up the gospel, and then we'll get out of here. So we finished the 4 Gospels. I'm going to come back to that question with which we began our study even before Mark. We talked about Philippides coming in and talking the good news that the Greeks had warded off the Persians at the Battle of Marathon in 490 BC. What is the gospel? I would like you to think as you leave this section, this module, about the gospel as being two sides of one coin. And I think this will help you mediate in some of the debates among Christian progressives and Christian conservatives. The gospel is the good news of Jesus, and it's the good news about Jesus. When we say the good news of Jesus, it's Jesus' great teachings, it's his proclamations of God's work, it's his wisdom, it's his love for the world, it's what Jesus taught. And that was that the kingdom of God is at hand. That God is doing an amazing thing in this world. And that you can live in a different way if you recognize that. There's also the gospel about Jesus, which is that Jesus came into the world and died to pay the sins of the world as the atoning sacrifice, and was raised and is coming again. See, progressive Christians really like the good news of Jesus. They like the moral teachings of Jesus. They don't really care so much about the good news about Jesus. You know, the death stuff and the resurrection, probably just as they that. And then you have conservative Christians who like the atonement stuff, the sacrifice stuff, but they can turn a blind eye and a deaf ear to the teachings of Jesus. The good news of the Gospels is both. It's that God has come in this man and transformed the world now and for eternity. Victory has come, and there is hope. And a fullness to the gospel lives out and understands and appreciates both sides of this divide. Any questions on the gospel? Last thoughts that you have? Things that I went through too quickly? Okay, with that, we'll wrap up a minute or two early. Make sure that you take a look at Acts for next class period. We'll go on to the next module, and I'll be sure to update Blackboard so that reflection question is in there, and that doesn't need to be written until Friday night. See you Thursday. I have to see specific. If you want to email there, the question I can look at it absolutely better. Yeah, mostly we're looking for those sections of the Bible. One of each of those 5 sections is part of the skeleton. If you want to email, that might be the answer instead of that. Thanks for listening. Yep. Hey, good job.
Thank you. On Thursday after class,
I can be for a few minutes. I have to be at the hub at 11:15, but that gives us, a little bit.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Can I do that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank
Let's
you.
do it right then.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Ellie.
Have a good day.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Okay, let me turn my record.